Divorcing my cheating wife, her life spirals downward as I rebuild myself and focus on our kids. There are moments in life that change everything. One of those moments came when I discovered my wife's affair. For years, I had been a devoted husband, doing everything I could to keep our family intact, to support her dreams, and to provide for our children. But when I walked in on her with another man, all of that shattered in an instant. What followed was not just the end of a marriage, it was the unraveling of a life I thought was built on trust and love. My world flipped upside down, and I had to make a choice. I could either let this betrayal consume me, or I could rebuild. It was painful, it was hard, but I knew what I had to do. While she spiraled further into her lies and deceit, I focused on what mattered most, my children. The decision to divorce was just the beginning. What came next would test me in ways I never expected. Stay tuned to hear how everything changed for both of us. I had always believed in the idea of forever. When I married Julia, I thought we had everything figured out. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but the foundation of our relationship was built on trust. Or so I thought. The first few years of our marriage were filled with joy. We had 2 beautiful children, a house that felt like a home, and a sense of partnership that made me believe we were untouchable. I was proud of everything we had built together. But as time went on, I started to notice small cracks. Julia became more distant, and while I was busy with work and taking care of the family, I told myself it was just a phase. Everyone goes through rough patches, right? She was busy with her career, and I was constantly trying to make ends meet. But even though I tried to convince myself otherwise, something didn't feel right. It wasn't until that day, the day that changed everything, that I truly understood what was going on. I came home early from work, planning to surprise her. What I found was a betrayal so deep that it left me speechless. Julia, my wife of 10 years, was in bed with another man. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The anger, the heartbreak, and the confusion flooded in all at once. I could not breathe. I stood there, unable to process the sight before me. I had always thought I would be the one to end things, if they ever needed to end. I had imagined it in my head countless times, but never like this. Never with me standing there, witnessing the woman I loved fall into someone else's arms. The man she was with? Someone I didn't even know, but I soon found out that it was someone from her work. Someone she had spent late nights with. The discovery of Julia's affair shattered everything I thought I knew about her, about our marriage, and about the future we had planned. I never imagined this would happen to me. The signs had been there, but I had ignored them. Julia had become more secretive, spending hours on her phone and staying late at the office, but I just assumed she was busy. The thought of her with someone else had never crossed my mind. After the confrontation, everything moved so quickly. Julia's guilt was evident, but instead of apologizing, she blamed me for not being there enough, for not understanding her needs. It was as if she was trying to shift the blame onto me. I felt betrayed and lost, not just because of the affair, but because of the way she was trying to justify it. It was clear that her priorities had changed, and it wasn't just about me or our family anymore. I moved out immediately. The decision was clear, but it wasn't easy. The children, of course, were at the center of it all. They were young and did not fully understand what was going on. But the tension in the house, the fighting, the silence, it was something they could feel. They were confused, and I didn't want them to grow up in that environment. I couldn't stand to see them hurt because of the choices Julia had made. I knew that the divorce would not be a simple process. Julia had always been a force in the family. She was a successful woman, and while she was deeply invested in her career, I had been the one to hold down the home front. But now, with everything falling apart, I had to figure out how to rebuild, how to start over, not just for myself, but for my children as well. After I moved out, it felt as if the world had collapsed beneath me. The quiet of the new house was deafening. My once lively home, filled with the laughter of children and the hum of daily life, was now a place of silence and stillness. The walls, which once held memories of family gatherings, were now merely a backdrop to my aching heart. Every day was a struggle. I spent my time focusing on the kids, keeping up with their routines, but deep down I was falling apart. I was a father trying to protect his children, but I had no idea how to protect myself from the pain of betrayal. There were moments of clarity, but they were fleeting. I would wake up in the middle of the night, the weight of what had happened pressing on me, my heart racing, and my thoughts spiraling. The man she had been with, the one who took her away from me, was always on my mind. I could not shake the image of her in his arms, of her laughter echoing in a place that was once reserved for me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to curse her out. I wanted to call her every name I could think of, but I didn't. I stayed silent. Because every time I thought about it, the anger would build up, and I knew I couldn't lose control, not in front of my children. They needed me more than ever, and I had promised myself that I would be the one stable force in their lives. But as the days passed, the anger began to shift. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was something deeper. a cold, suffocating feeling that lingered, eating away at my self-worth. Julia had not just cheated, she had disregarded everything we had built. She had torn apart the trust and love we shared, and the worst part was that she had done it without even a second thought. But more than that, I started to see the reality of our relationship, the cracks that had been there all along. I realized that perhaps I had been too blind to see them before. Julia had become distant over the last year. Her focus was no longer on our family, and I had told myself that she was just busy with her work, that things would get better. But I should have seen the signs, the late nights, the secretive behavior, the phone calls she would take in another room. I had ignored them, choosing to believe in our bond, in the idea of love that we had once shared. But now, after everything, I understood that the bond was broken long before I caught her in the act. She had pulled away from me long before the affair even started. The anger I felt was consuming, but it soon became clear to me that anger alone would not help me move forward. I realized I could not stay stuck in that moment forever. It was tempting to remain angry, to play the victim, to wallow in my sorrow. But I knew that if I wanted to rebuild, if I wanted to start over for myself and for the kids, I could not allow that to happen. I could not let her betrayal define the rest of my life. I had to take control. I had to move forward, no matter how painful it was. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I stood in the quiet of my new home. I felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The pain was still there, like an open wound, but something else was growing inside me. A sense of purpose. I was no longer going to be a passive participant in this disaster. I had always been the one to hold things together, taking care of the kids, paying the bills, making sure our home ran smoothly. But now, I had to focus on myself. I had to stop letting Julia's choices define my life. I called a lawyer the next day. It was time to take legal action. The divorce would not be easy, but I was done. The anger I had felt toward Julia's betrayal was still there, but now, it was channeled into something more focused. I wanted justice, and I wanted to make sure the kids were taken care of. I was prepared to fight for custody, for my family, for my future. I would not let her get away with what she had done. As the weeks went on, I started to make plans. I reached out to my closest friends for support. I knew that I could not go through this alone. But there was something else that began to settle within me, something that surprised me. I realized that the divorce was not just about ending my marriage. It was about reclaiming my own identity, my own strength. I had allowed Julia's actions to define me for far too long. Now, I was taking control of my future. But my journey toward healing wasn't just about the legal battles. It was also about exposing the truth. Julia had always cared deeply about her image. She was a successful woman in her career, always striving for perfection in the public eye. But I had seen a different side of her, one that was more selfish and deceitful than I could have imagined. I wasn't going to let her get away with her lies. If she wanted to destroy our family, she needed to face the consequences. So, I began to gather evidence. I knew that taking the affair public would make things difficult for her, but I also knew it was the right thing to do. She needed to be held accountable for her actions. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake, I wanted justice. I wanted the world to see who she really was, to understand the depth of the hurt she had caused. It was not just about hurting her back, it was about showing everyone the truth of what had happened. In those moments, as I planned my next steps, I realized that I was no longer the man I had been when I walked into that room and discovered Julia's betrayal. I was stronger now, more determined. I was a man who was reclaiming his life, his self-worth, and his future. And no matter how difficult the road ahead would be, I knew I would be ready to face it. The first court hearing was a blur. The room, cold and sterile, felt suffocating. As I sat there, waiting for the proceedings to begin, I tried to focus on the task ahead. The reality of the situation weighed heavily on my shoulders, but I knew that I could not back down now. This was not just a fight for my future, but for the future of my children. Julia was on the other side of the courtroom, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her differently. She wasn't the woman I had once loved, the one who had shared her hopes and dreams with me. She was now just another person sitting in that room, facing the consequences of her actions. But despite the anger I felt, I could not help but feel a strange emptiness in my chest. This wasn't how I had imagined our lives turning out. This was not the future I had envisioned when we got married. As the judge called for the start of the proceedings, I tried to steady my breathing. I had spent so much time thinking about the betrayal and preparing for this moment that I had not fully considered what it would feel like to be here, in the thick of it. My lawyer spoke first, outlining the case for full custody of our children. The evidence I had gathered over the past weeks, the emails, the texts, the phone records, painted a clear picture of Julia's actions. Her affair had not been a momentary lapse in judgment. It had been a pattern. She had made the choice to betray not just me, but the entire family we had built. As the details of her affair were laid bare in front of the judge, I saw Julia's face. Her cheeks flushed with anger, her eyes darting around the room as she tried to maintain her composure. For the first time, I saw her vulnerable, exposed in a way that she had never allowed me to see before. The woman who had once been untouchable, who had controlled every situation with grace and poise, was now falling apart before my eyes. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. I had been the one to hide my pain, to bury my emotions while she flaunted her affair as if it were justified. Now, the tables had turned. The truth was being told, and I was no longer the one left in the shadows. But there was more. As the proceedings went on, my lawyer asked for a temporary order of full custody of the children. The judge listened carefully to both sides, but in the end he sided with me. Julia had not been able to provide the stability and emotional support that our children needed. The emotional toll of the affair had taken a clear toll on their well-being, and the judge acknowledged that. In that moment, as I heard the judge's ruling, I felt a rush of relief. This was not just a legal victory, it was a victory for my children, for their future. But the revelation did not end there. The most unexpected part came when the judge ordered a psychological evaluation for Julia. It seemed that her actions and the way she had handled the affair had raised serious questions about her ability to parent effectively. In that moment, I saw the truth unfolding in front of me. Julia had been living in a fantasy world, and the consequences of her actions were now starting to catch up with her. The mask she had worn for so long was slipping, and the cracks in her carefully crafted persona were becoming too obvious to ignore. I could see the shock in her eyes as she heard the ruling. The woman who had always prided herself on being in control, on keeping up appearances, was now powerless. The life she had once taken for granted was slipping through her fingers. And as she looked across the room at me, there was no trace of the woman I had once loved. There was only a stranger. As the court session ended, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I had won this round, but I knew the battle was far from over. The next few months would be long, filled with more legal battles, more fights over custody, more decisions to be made. But in that moment, I felt something I had not felt in a long time: hope. Hope that things would get better. Hope that I could rebuild my life, that I could create a future that was no longer defined by Julia's betrayal. The truth, it seemed, was finally out. Julia's lies, her deceit, her betrayal, everything was now exposed. And with it came the beginning of the end for the life we had once shared. But it also marked the beginning of a new chapter for me. A chapter where I was no longer defined by her choices. A chapter where I could finally heal, where I could finally move forward. As I walked out of the courtroom, I could feel the weight on my chest lighten just a little. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but for the first time, I knew I was not alone in this fight. I had the truth on my side. And that was something Julia could never take away from me. The weeks that followed the court ruling were some of the most difficult of my life. While the legal battle was far from over, the initial victory had given me a sense of purpose that I had been missing for a long time. For the first time in months, I had clarity. The uncertainty that had clouded my every thought was slowly dissipating, and I could finally see a path forward. But the emotional toll of everything that had happened began to hit me harder than I had anticipated. Despite the victory in court, I was left with a lingering sense of loss. Julia and I had been together for over a decade. Our marriage had been my world, and in an instant, it had shattered. While I was grateful for the custody ruling, the reality of raising 2 children on my own was overwhelming. There were moments when I questioned if I was strong enough to handle it all. The first few nights without Julia were the hardest. The house that had once been filled with laughter and shared moments of joy was now eerily quiet. I had to adjust to the new dynamic with the children, figuring out how to balance work, school runs, and everything in between. But even in the chaos, I found a renewed sense of purpose. My children were the anchor I needed. Their well-being was the one thing that mattered, and I focused on being the father they deserved. Julia, on the other hand, seemed to spiral even further. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court had revealed deeper issues. It wasn't just her affair, it was everything that had led up to it. Julia had always been a perfectionist, obsessed with maintaining an image of success and happiness. But under that polished exterior, cracks had been forming for years. The affair was just the breaking point, the culmination of everything she had kept hidden. Her life began to unravel in ways I never could have imagined. The TV actor she had cheated with distanced himself from her after the scandal became public. The media attention had been relentless, and soon she found herself with fewer and fewer people to turn to. The betrayal she had inflicted upon our family was now coming full circle, and the consequences were no longer just personal, they were public. Her career, which had once been a source of pride, was now tarnished. The public image she had worked so hard to maintain was forever shattered. I could not help but feel a strange sense of detachment as I watched this unfold. I had once been the one to hide my pain, the one who had suffered in silence. But now, Julia's world was crumbling, and I was no longer the person who would bear the brunt of her actions. I had taken control of my own life, and it was clear that Julia had lost hers. While she struggled with the fallout, I focused on what truly mattered, my children. The bond one had with them deepened every day. Together, we found a new rhythm, a new normal. I involved them more in daily decisions, listened to their worries, and reassured them that everything would be okay. Slowly but surely, they began to heal. The weight of their mother's betrayal had affected them more than I had realized, but I was determined to help them through it. The pain they had suffered would not define them. In the months that followed, Julia's attempts to regain control were futile. She hired a team of lawyers to fight for custody, but the judge had already seen the evidence. She had lost her place in the family, and no legal maneuver could change that. I was their father and I was not going anywhere. In the midst of everything, I found healing. The long nights of reflection, the hours spent wondering how things had gone so wrong, slowly gave way to a new sense of self. I no longer saw myself as a victim of Julia's betrayal. I was a man who had been broken, but who had rebuilt himself from the ground up. I had come to understand that the end of our marriage was not the end of my life. It was simply a new chapter. I began to focus on my personal growth. I took up hobbies I had neglected over the years, started exercising again, and reconnected with old friends. I made a conscious effort to rebuild my social life, to surround myself with people who supported me, people who valued me for who I was, not who I had been. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer consumed me. I had learned to live with it, to make peace with it. As for Julia, I could only watch from a distance as her life continued its downward spiral. She had lost not only her marriage, but her sense of self. The woman who had once been so sure of her place in the world was now adrift, searching for meaning in the aftermath of her own choices. I knew that I had made the right decision for myself and my children, but I could not deny the sense of sadness that lingered. My children continued to thrive under my care. They became my strength, my motivation to keep moving forward. We celebrated their achievements, their small victories, and we supported each other through the tough days. I knew that despite everything that had happened, I was doing the right thing. I was a better father than I had been a husband. And that realization in itself was a victory. Eventually, the legal proceedings came to a close. Julia and I signed the divorce papers, officially ending what had once been a promising future. I walked away with full custody of our children, the house, and a renewed sense of purpose. The damage had been done, but I had learned to rise from it. The road ahead was not easy. There were still moments of doubt, still times when the weight of the past would creep in. But I knew one thing for certain: I had reclaimed my life. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly at peace. If you found this story compelling, be sure to like the video. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.